Back here on Sportsline, and yesterday I think everybody around the country took note of the fact that the nation stopped or paused or halted, whatever word you want to use, distribution of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine across the country due to some complications in it, blood clots and the other. They want to study it further. They want to figure out if this is a more widespread problem or very, very isolated and small before they distribute it anymore. But obviously it raises some eyebrows about just how much we know about these vaccines and where we're going to go with them, and if that one in particular is going to get back into circulation at some point. But while that was happening and that discussion was taking place, there were a lot of sort of under the radar stories in the NFL yesterday in regards to COVID and in regards to the vaccines. So first and foremost, the NFL Players Association yesterday recommended that players skip any of the voluntary workouts of an off-season program this year. Their recommendation is that the entire off-season program be voluntary. Now, the NFLPA doesn't want to have an off-season program in the first place, but their reasoning this year is because of the ongoing pandemic, and they just told players it is not smart to have to go into facilities and be around people right now. We hope later in the summer that this is less of a problem even than it is today, but it's just not smart to do it right now. So their recommendation was no participation in the voluntary workouts. And we saw several teams come out yesterday, Broncos, Seahawks, a couple others, say that they have no desire to go through voluntary workouts. And so the NFL, in response to that, kind of tweaked their offseason program rules this week. They're extending the off-field portion, the virtual part, into mid-May now. They still do have time in there for practices from mid-May into June, those OTA periods, into the minicamp. But it's unclear how many teams are going to have players that want to show up or will willingly show up for that, because they are, after all, still voluntary organized team activities. So how is that going to play out? That is one story. The other thing that happened was the NFL sent a memo to all its teams yesterday saying that the expectation is that team employees will get the vaccine, and that in order to work closely with players, you will have to get the vaccine unless you have significant medical or religious exemptions that would get you out of it. That was a league-wide memo. And the reason I find that so interesting is because I think that's going to be a conversation in a lot of areas around this country about employers potentially telling you you need to do that. And the NFL is sort of a big bad employer. It makes billions of dollars and employs a lot of people and has the eyes of the country upon it. And that was the internal memo it sent to teams yesterday. I think we're going to hear more on that story. I think we're going to have more on this discussion, not just in sports, but probably throughout the entire society over the next several weeks and perhaps months. And then the final story that fits into this piece from yesterday is the Erie County, New York executive, Mark Palacratz. That is the county in which Buffalo and Orchard Park reside, said yesterday that come the fall, the county's hope is that both the Bills and the Sabres, the NHL team, will have full stadiums or arenas come the fall when the next season starts. But while the expectation is full screaming arenas, he says the county is only going to allow you in if you've had the vaccine and can prove that you've had it. Now, I guess the county has the power to do that up there because the county runs both the football stadium and the arena. But immediately there's some questions that go in there. One, again, it's a mandate coming from a governmental agency, basically, to tell you. Maybe that holds up, maybe it doesn't. I'm not totally sure, but it's certainly going to spark questions. But perhaps the biggest one I thought of right away is at this exact moment, these vaccines, which are only emergency use authorization in the first place, they're not like other vaccines out there in the world, aren't at all authorized under any circumstance for children under the age of 16. How many kids make up the audience at NFL games or NHL games? How many parents love nothing more than to take their 10-year-old son or 7-year-old daughter to go enjoy those games together? Is Buffalo not going to let kids into the games? Are there going to be exemptions for that? What other exemptions are there going to be? It's a very, very challenging and slippery slope, I think, which inexplicably he was not asked to define yesterday by the people in attendance at his little media gathering. But that is another question that's going to have to come up here. Will there be other teams in other states that look into doing that? New York obviously has been one of the more restrictive states throughout the entire pandemic. Does this just fall in line with that? Is this one particular county? Or are we going to see this in a lot of other places? You know, here in Nashville, we as a city have lifted the mask mandate if you're outside. When Nashville SC kicks off this weekend on Saturday night, there is no city mask mandate that requires you to have to wear a mask inside Nissan Stadium. Now, I think Nashville SC, they haven't finalized this yet and sent out all their restrictions on what you can and cannot do in the stadium, other than it will just be limited attendance to some degree. But I imagine they will start by wearing masks, at least to start the season, maybe for the entire season. The Nashville Sounds open up their season in a couple of weeks, and they are going to start by requiring masks of fans, because Major League Baseball, and therefore Minor League Baseball, requires every stadium to have the people inside wearing masks. That's just where it is right now. So all of these things are going to change and be adapted and all of it. But when you start talking about the vaccine, obviously there's a big debate out there on how many people should get it, what ages are most important to get it, how far down, I mean, should kids get it? Those are very debatable topics at this point. And that conversation isn't going away. And the more you see some of these conversations, like a sports league saying, we're going to mandate employees do this, or they're not going to be able to do their job in the same way they've done it before. How's that work? Is that really a decision you can even make, or do you just kind of have to do it at that point? Same thing for a football game. If you can't go, and that's something that you really enjoy to do, maybe you weren't going to get the vaccine, but do you have to now, if that's the case? And is that okay? Are we okay with that as Americans? Maybe the collective decision is that those types of mandates, rulings, are okay. But I think there's a big chunk of the population out there that doesn't think it's okay. And again, I think it's going to be very interesting to see these segments of the country of where it is. That happened in New York. New York has essentially been locked down for 13 months. We are 27 hours away, 28 hours away, check my math, a little between there, 27 and a half hours away from essentially opening Nashville back up. Mask mandates gone outside, bars and restaurants go back to normal hours starting at 12:01 Friday morning. Several other key factors return towards normal. It won't be completely normal, and masks are still required inside and all of that. But we're at the place now, with vaccines being 30+% of the population around here, and cases dipping and dipping and dipping daily, we're at the place where the health experts believe that's okay. Florida's been open for a while. Guess what? Their cases are still going down. Texas has been open for a while. Cases are still going down. I don't see those states issuing mandates like this. But is the NFL going to mandate? Or is the NHL going to mandate it? Or is your employer going to mandate it? I think those are questions that are going to be, unfortunately, because nobody wants to deal with this, I think it's going to be hot and center. And I think it's going to be front and center in sports, and I think it's going to be front and center in life for all of us over the next several weeks and months. Because we all want to get back to normal. Everybody does. But the debate is going to be how you can get there, how safely you can do it, and what the role these vaccines play in that. And if it's essentially okay for government and or private enterprise to dictate your choice on the vaccine. Anyway, I just found it interesting yesterday because everybody was talking about the news with the J&J vaccine. And that's going to stay in the news until they figure out exactly what's going on. But at the same time, they were looking around at one of the 3 authorized vaccines and saying, uh-oh, there may be a problem here. There were these other things happening with various mandates about making people take the vaccine to be a part of the NFL, either as an employee or as a fan. And then you have the Players Association sitting there saying, we're not at a place yet that you should feel free walking back into your facility and getting ready to do a physical activity. We're just not there. And those were the messages coming out yesterday from the NFL. And again, I think all of those stories we're going to hear a lot more on in the coming days and weeks. Phone lines are open, 737-7767, the number. This is Sportsline, and you're watching News Channel 5 Plus.